The jungle never made noise like this before. Not for him. Not until today. Leaves trembled in silence, branches held their breath, and somewhere in the distance, where even the birds had forgotten how to sing, a sound emerged that didn't belong. A groan, low, deep, heavy with grief. Thomas stopped walking. He felt it before he heard it. A chill crawling up the back of his neck, the way a man feels when something wild is watching. Or remembering, he turned slowly toward the clearing. Ahead, the very place it had all begun. The tall grass bowed in submission, parting like curtains at the entrance of a stage that hadn't seen its actors in years. And there, standing like a ghost stitched into golden daylight, was the lion. Not just any lion. 15 years earlier. The jungle had been less quiet, less wise. Back then, Thomas was just a wildlife volunteer from the city, all beer, boots, and borrowed bravery. He had come to Kenya for 3 months. He stayed 3 years. It was supposed to be simple. Document animal movement, track population behavior, stay out of the way. But on the 23rd day, nature had other plans. The heat was suffocating that afternoon, like the sun had decided to press its full weight onto the earth. Thomas, already drenched in sweat, had veered off the usual track to chase a strange sound. Not a roar, but something weaker, raspier, like pain. He followed it without thinking, pushing through thorns and roots until he stumbled upon something that would haunt his dreams forever. A young lion, barely more than a cub, lay twisted in a wire trap, its leg deeply cut, blood mixing with dust. Its eyes weren't wild. They were terrified. He should have radioed it in. He should have backed away. But he didn't. He dropped to his knees. The cub tried to growl but failed. Its voice cracked mid-snarl, like it wanted to fight, but couldn't even cry properly. Thomas saw it in those eyes. Not rage, not fury, just a desperate, wordless question. "Are you going to help me or finish me?" He whispered. "Easy now, buddy. I'm not here to hurt you." His hand shook as he pulled out his knife and reached for the twisted wire. The lion flinched but didn't move. He held its gaze the whole time, speaking gently, not for the lion's comfort, but his own. Minutes felt like hours. Sweat stung his eyes, dirt filled his fingernails, and his heart pounded loud enough to wake the jungle gods. But finally, the wire gave. The lion whimpered and fell sideways. Thomas caught its head just before it hit the ground. They stayed like that for a moment. 2 creatures, both lost in the middle of nowhere, both unsure of what to fear more. Each other or what came next. Then Thomas did something no textbook ever advised. He hugged the lion. It wasn't planned. It wasn't smart. But it was real. And the lion didn't resist. Over the next year, they saw each other again. And again. Not often, but enough. The lion, now older and stronger, would appear at the edges of the reserve, watching, listening, waiting. And Thomas? You would whistle the same tune, slow and calm, as he tossed a slab of meat over the fence and sat nearby. They had no language. No understanding. Only time. And sometimes that's enough. They called the lion Sefu, Swahili for sword. Fitting. Thomas thought, for an animal that cut through the silence like fate. Sefu never came too close. He never let anyone else near. Rangers joked he had a soft spot for Thomas, like the man that cast a spell. But Thomas never claimed ownership. He never wanted it. He knew Sefu wasn't his. He was the jungle's. And someday, the jungle would call him back. That call came 3 years later. It was Thomas's last month in Africa. He had extended his stay twice. He had turned down jobs, lost touch with friends. But this time, it had to end. His father was sick. The kind of sick that doesn't wait. Thomas packed quietly, telling no one but the reserve chief. He didn't want goodbyes, especially not from Sefu, who hadn't shown. Up for nearly 2 months, maybe he was gone. Maybe he forgot. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be. But on his final morning, something strange happened. The trees rustled just before dawn and the birds scattered. Thomas, standing by the edge of camp, saw the figure before he heard the breath.sefu. Older. Now, bigger, a full-grown male with a mane like smoke and gold. His eyes locked on Thomas from 30 feet away, no hunger, no threat. Just memory. Thomas couldn't believe it. He stepped forward. So did the lion. 5 feet. Then 4. Then 2. And then they stood wild and man, breathing the same humid air. Thomas raised his arm slowly. Sefu leaned forward, and for the second time in their strange history, man and lion touched. It wasn't a hug. It was something deeper. A pause in time. A pack. And then the lion turned and walked away. Without looking back, that was 10 years ago. Decades since he left the jungle. 10 years of normal life, if you can call it that. Thomas buried his father. Got a desk job. Lived in a city where lions only roared. On TV screens, but something inside him never left. And now, it was pulling him back. An email had arrived last week. From a former ranger at the reserve. Old lion spotted limping near Sector 4. Locals say he's alone. Doesn't eat. Just waits. Thought you should know. Thomas hadn't hesitated. He booked the flight that night. Now, standing at the edge of the same clearing he had once bled in, Thomas watched the old lion step forward. Sefu's body had changed, thinner, slower. The mighty mane had thinned. Scars decorated his sides like a road map of survival. But the eyes? They hadn't changed, not one bit. They still asked the same question. Are you here to help me or say goodbye? Thomas dropped to one knee, not out of fear, but wait. The unbearable kind. He couldn't hold it any longer. Everything in him trembled. Not from weakness. From recognition. He whispered, I came back. Sefu limped closer. The space between them vanished. And then, without a single growl or sound, the lion lowered his head, gently, slowly, and pressed it into Thomas's chest. Thomas rapped. His arms around him. This time, the hug wasn't brief. It was everything. 15 years. One wire trap. 1,000 memories, all held together in the silence of a dying afternoon. But the jungle wasn't done yet. Not even close, because something was watching. And what happened next? Thomas never saw coming. The wind shifted, and the moment shattered. Sefu pulled away, not suddenly, but alert, his ears twitching toward the tree line behind Thomas. Thomas turned, sensing it too. Something wasn't right. Not the way the birds had gone quiet, or how the shadows beneath the acacias looked longer than they should in the coulee. Afternoon sun. It was the silence, but not the peaceful kind. The kind that comes right before something terrible. Then it. HAPENEDA crack. Not from the forest. From metal. Rifle. The bullet struck the ground just inches from where they stood, kicking up a spit of dirt between man and lion. Thomas stumbled back instinctively, eyes scanning the ridge. He didn't need long. 3 figures emerged. Men. Guns. Too calm for rangers. Too confident to be tourists. Poachers. They had followed the lion, not for beauty, not for respect, but for bounty. The older and rarer the beast, the higher the price. Sefu stood still, majestic, unaware of his own vulnerability. Or maybe he knew. Maybe he no longer cared. Thomas raised both arms and shouted, Nino, don't shoot. This animal is protected. But words meant nothing to men like these. They raised their weapons again. Thomas lunged sideways, grabbing a fallen branch, hurling it toward them, not to harm, but to distract. The men shouted something in Swahili, but the tone said it all. Back off. This isn't yours. Sefu didn't move, but his eyes. They were locked on Thomas. Not in fear. In warning. The second shot came fast. Not at the lion. Thomas gasped, the bullet grazing his shoulder. It didn't pierce deep, but it sent him spinning, crashing to the ground. Dust filled his lungs. Pain bloomed down his arm. Then a roar ripped through the jungle. It wasn't human. that it wasn't just angry, that it was ancient.sefu charged. The men didn't expect it. Not from such an old beast, but this was no ordinary lion. This was the jungle's sword, the one who had waited, the one who had remembered. He reached the first poacher before the gun could lift. Teeth met bone, claws met screams. The jungle woke. Birds exploded from trees. Monkeys shrieked warnings from the canopies. Even the wind seemed to howl. The other two men scrambled. One fired again, missing both lion and sky before tripping backward over a root and vanishing into the underbrush. Third ran. Sefu didn't chase. He turned back, blood on his face, breath ragged, muscles trembling from the effort. And then he collapsed. Thomas crawled forward, his body screaming in pain. He didn't care. Sefu! The lion's side was heaving. Not from injury, from exhaustion. The years had caught up in an instant. The beast had spent his final fire. To protect the only man he'd ever trusted. Thomas knelt beside him, his own blood mixing with the dirt, hands reaching for fur still warm but fading. No, not now. Sefu blinked. Slow, heavy, his head shifted just slightly, pressing again into Thomas's palm. That same place, that same silence. And then stillness. Total stillness. Sefu's chest no longer rose. It rained that night. Hard. Thunder cracked like skyfire as the jungle mourned in its own language. Thomas sat by the body, refusing shelter, refusing help from the rangers who had finally arrived. They asked questions. He gave none. There was nothing to say. Some stories don't need telling. They need remembering. The burial was done at dawn. Deep in the same clearing where they had first met. No stone, no marker, just earth and memory. Thomas stood over the grave, shoulder freshly bandaged, voice hoarse from the night. He whispered one word, "Thank you," then turned to leave. But the jungle wasn't finished. A week later, back in the village, a local ranger found something strange on his trail camera. The footage was blurry, dark, shot in the low light of early morning, but clear enough. It showed Sefu's grave and something moving toward it. 3 lions, all female. One by one, they approached the mound of fresh dirt, circled it, then sat in silence for hours. They never touched it. They never left a mark. They just watched. Grieved. Waited. Then, just before sunrise, they walked away. The video went viral days later. Not because of the lions, but because of what happened next. At the edge of the frame, barely visible, a cub followed the LIONESSES. Small, young, golden eye. It stopped at the grave. It didn't sit. It didn't watch. It climbed the mound and laid down, perfectly still, like it belonged there. Like it knew. Thomas saw the footage from his apartment back in the city. And for the first time in months, he cried, not from sadness, but from something deeper, something unexplainable. Because that cub, it had a scar, small, faint, barely visible, but in the same place Sefu had once bled, on the front right leg. And in its eyes, the same question: are you here to help me or say goodbye? Some bonds are forged in blood, some in silence, and some, the rarest kind, are written across lifetimes. You don't need to understand them. You only need to believe they're real. And once in a while, if you're lucky, you might hug a lion and never be the same again.